machine that breaks all the rules, conquering some of the toughest terrains on Earth. Over land, over water, from the polar ice to the rapids of the Amazon. This is the ultimate frictionless floating machine, the amazing Hovercraft.
Hovercrafts are fast. They go over land and water and are really awesome.
Every month, Jonathan Spedding races his twin-engine Meteor. This is the Formula One race. The Hovercraft literally rides on a cushion of air. It can master almost any terrain, barely touching the ground as it floats majestically past, and on water, it leaves virtually no ripple in its wake. Jonathan's Hovercraft has one engine at the front that pushes air into the rubber skirt below to create lift. Another engine on the back provides the thrust that drives it forward. He steers by controlling a rudder right behind the drive fan, but he also uses the weight of his body to move the craft from side to side. They make it look easy, but it's a lot like driving on ice. And like all motorsports, it has its risks. An ill-judged move at 80 miles an hour can hurl a rider right out of his craft. Today, Jonathan's precise handling and cool control wins him the first prize in the Formula One of hovercraft racing. But his hovercraft is just a minnow. Large hovercraft can hover up to 16 feet above the ground. These leviathans can take on the most inhospitable terrain.
As the Americans say, there's no beach out of reach with a hovercraft, and 70% of the world's beaches are accessible by hovercraft, whereas only 10 to 15% are by conventional landing craft.
They thrive in conditions that would trash other vehicles. They're more versatile than a boat and cheaper than a helicopter. This unusual machine is a British invention. Today, the British Royal Marines Assault Squadron operate a fleet of them.
I think they're great. I think they are one of the best bits of kit going. There are things that you can do with hovercraft that you just cannot do with any other craft.
Just got passenger in front of them, or go to the left of Al.
The assault squadron's job is to support amphibious landings. The hovercraft they use are low-tech and low-cost. Even so, nothing else can match their performance in the Arctic extremities.
A hovercraft will travel at 30 or 40 knots straight over water or over obstacles up to half a metre high. Sandbanks, rocks, vegetation, anything like that does not affect hovercraft operations at all. And actually the hovercraft just lap it up.
But the hovercraft's incredible speed gives the Marines an extra edge.
As commanders, it gives us huge flexibility because we can use nearly any beach that we want to.
On ice, they can hit even faster speeds, up to 70 miles an hour.
The last thing we actually want to do is drop our troops into the water and they have to wade ashore. They start off whatever operation, wet and cold. A hovercraft can take them to the top of the beach quickly, easily, drop down, they unload their kit and off they go.
The Royal Marines hovercraft are ideal for landing soldiers dry onto a beach, but sometimes they're in danger of getting more than just wet feet. They can be deployed while these machines are still going at full tilt. Royal Marine Commandos must transfer from a moving hovercraft to a smaller, rigid raiding craft. This is a very dangerous maneuver, which tests the pilot's skill, not to mention the nerve of the Marines. For the Marines, the hovercraft is multi-talented, but the concept of riding on a cushion of air dates back more than a century. Boats can't reach high speeds because of the friction between the hull and the water. In 1877, John Thornycroft, a brilliant British boat designer, argued that trapping air under a boat could reduce the problem of friction. He tested his idea with a scale model of the flat-bottomed boat with a recess underneath. Air trapped in the recess lifted the boat almost out of the water, increasing its speed. Later, he built a much more complex model using a clockwork mechanism connected to bellows. The bellows pumped air underneath the boat. As it passed through the water, the air acted as a lubricant, reducing the boat's friction and once again increasing its speed. Sadly for Thornycroft, his boat needed better engine technology than existed at the time. His patents were never exploited. Over half a century later, another inventor took up the challenge and built the first full-sized hovercraft. That man was Christopher Cockerell. His unwavering belief in the air cushion principle earned him a place in the history books as the inventor of the hovercraft. When he unveiled the first prototype of his extraordinary machine, the press were amazed. The headlines called it the flying saucer, but they didn't believe it could possibly work over water. So the scientists took it out into the bay for its maiden voyage over the sea.
It just sailed off into the water as I expected it to. In fact, they were all rather amazed, and I knew it would happen.
Cockerell was a well-respected engineer. He already had many patents to his name. He knew the hovercraft would work because of his early experiments. using an air blower, 2 tin cans, one inside the other, and a set of scales. The air from the blower alone hardly moved the scales.
But if you expand this by turning it into a circular jet, so the air comes out in a thin curtain of air like that, then and this will support a bigger load as a hovercraft than using just a straight jet.
In 1955, he built a prototype to prove his theory. Once he was sure it would work, he tried to market his idea.
I took it round the aircraft industry, but were told it wasn't an aircraft, it was a ship. And I tried taking it round some of the firms that made ships, and they said, no, that's not a ship, that's an aeroplane.
Finally, he approached the British government. They were so impressed that they immediately classified it top secret. Then they sent experts from the armed forces to visit Cockerell.
I had a model, which was that I made, whizzing round, and looked very dangerous, and one of them climbed on the chairs to get out of the light of the damn thing. The Navy chap sort of looked up like that and said, useless, wouldn't stand any sort of a seaway, wouldn't last a minute.
The Army and the Air Force were also unimpressed. It took 2 more long years before the government funded a study of Cockerell's hovercraft theory.
Air enters through the inlet at the top. The fan blows it through a circular slit around the bottom. This produces a curtain of air which blows down all around the outer edge of the vehicle, trapping a bubble or cushion of air beneath the hovercraft. It's literally riding on air.
After exhaustive testing, the scientists finally unveiled a full-scale prototype in 1959. 1 month later, Cockerell's amazing invention proved itself decisively. Cockerell shipped his craft across to Calais. Early one morning, the so-called flying saucer set off to cross the English Channel. It was the 50th anniversary of the first plane flight across the Channel. Cockerell was anxious to show that his hovercraft could make the 22-mile crossing just as easily. At first they made good progress, but as they sighted the white cliffs of Dover, they hit choppy water. For the first time, the hovercraft was forced to cope with rough seas.
And it was quite a thrill because you got up a wave and then you slid down it nicely and got up another one. And then we shot up the shore at Dover, and some BBC chap turned up to me and said, will you come with me and do an interview? And I said, no, I want some breakfast.
At the same time that Cockerell was trying to interest the British government, an American inventor in a small Illinois town was experimenting with his own version of an air-cushioned vehicle.
We don't always have this beautiful weather in Illinois, and I was a country doctor, and I made house calls.
Dr. Bertelsen needed something to cover rough country in even rougher weather to visit his patients. Not knowing about Cockerell's work, he developed his own machine and tested the first prototypes on the town football field. He was surprised at his results.
It was a wonderful experience. I thought I had the world by the tail. I thought this was going to be so easy to do. I thought we could get a machine that would be user-friendly, widely producible, and I thought I could dash it off real quickly. It will work just great on a level surface with zero wind. It could go very, very effectively. But on any kind of a groove or any kind of a grade, you had to out-tilt a hill in order to climb it.
Bertelsen was only an amateur, but he was persistent. He knew his idea had a future. He was probably the first man ever to fly an air-cushioned vehicle over water.
I had no idea what it was going to do, but it flew beautifully, and it created enormous spray, but its control system worked. Even on water, I could go forward, backward, sideways, pivot.
Encouraged by his success, he continued inventing ever more sophisticated designs, pushing his concepts to the absolute limit. His bizarre machines all hovered well over different surfaces, but there was one problem. Bertelson's contraptions were difficult to steer. Back in Britain, Cockerell's scientists were also having problems. Their craft didn't perform well on high seas or over obstacles more than 10 inches high. They built a new research craft to investigate the problem. Like Bertelsen, they found that it was extremely difficult to control the craft's direction because the hovercraft followed the contours of whatever surface it was riding over. Then they made a breakthrough. Their new idea was the skirt, a flexible, rubberized extension below the craft. It adjusted closely to uneven surfaces and created a good seal for the air cushion. This also increased the hover height of the main body of the craft above the surface, improving its maneuverability. With these new extensions, the craft shimmied across obstacles effortlessly. A steep gully or ridge used to be an impassable barrier. Now hovercraft could fly over obstacles up to 4 feet in height. The flexible skirt was a defining moment in the hovercraft's history. In over 35 years, the basic design has hardly altered at all. When a hovercraft starts, fans drive down into a flexible tube of skirt around the edge of the craft. This high-pressure air escapes through holes in the inside wall of the tube, generating an air cushion under the entire floor. The skirt holds in the air cushion exactly the same way as the can in Cockerell's original experiment. More air is fed down through the fingers attached to the skirt bottom. This helps to contain the air within the cushion. By the early 60s, designers had finally perfected the hovercraft concept. The British military, once so sceptical, immediately started a series of tests.
Straight from the beginning, the military could see the application of hovercraft. They weren't sure if it was going to be Navy or Air Force or Army, so they all had a go. They set up an inter-service hovercraft trials unit, and they sent hovercraft to every corner of the world in every environment, and really put hovercraft through their paces.
They took a 350-mile round trip into the heart of the Libyan desert, over terrain that would reduce conventional vehicles to smoking ruins. The craft was powered by a single Rolls-Royce gas turbine engine. The sand wore down the edges of the skirt and clogged the engine intakes, but such problems were relatively trivial. No other vehicle in the world could have attempted such an arduous journey. Next, the research team took the hovercraft to the Canadian Arctic. Once again, the craft left them slack-jawed in amazement.
Over the swept surface, maximum speed exceeded 60 miles an hour. At an all-up weight of 16,000 pounds, short slopes of an inch 3 with a vertical height of over 17 feet were negotiated.
The craft occasionally iced up, and the skirt inevitably took some hammer, but the hovercraft had cracked yet another impossible journey with ease. The expeditions had finally proved this new technology. The designers developed new hovercrafts specifically for military applications. Armed forces around the world wanted them, impressed by their amphibious capabilities. Manufacturers were swamped with orders. At sea, the hovercraft has stealth. Flying above the water, it has a low magnetic signature and can't be detected by sonar. Hovercraft also have the important virtue of being able to fly over mines without detonating them. And even if a mine did explode, hovercraft are immune to underwater explosions. And incredibly, they're also safe from landmines. Their minimal pressure on the ground gives them almost complete protection. For the military, hovercraft are the only choice for a fast amphibious assault and to land troops dry and ready for action. In the Far East, the British Army used the hovercraft's unique amphibious character to patrol land accessible only by river, easily navigating rapids and opening up once impenetrable jungles. In the Bay of Hong Kong, the Royal Navy maintained night and day hovercraft patrols to intercept and deter illegal immigrants. The presence of these strangely intimidating machines also deterred drug smugglers.
The first commercial application of the hovercraft is soon to get underway in San Francisco.
The American public first met the hovercraft in 1963. It was used as a ferry carrying commuters across San Francisco Bay. Attracting enormous interest, it rapidly became a popular way to travel.
They feel that the low-flying hovercraft have a high-flying future.
In 1967, the US Army and Navy took British-designed hovercraft to Vietnam. This war machine could go places no other vehicle could. Traveling easily through the swamps, it was used to seek and destroy the Viet Cong. But despite unanimous enthusiasm and plenty of success stories, no one was improving the technology. New hovercraft were no better than the generation they replaced. Then the US Navy got involved. During the 70s, America took the technology from the British and built the next generation of hovercraft. Prototypes were tested to their absolute limits. The military was mightily impressed with the craft's incredible resilience under fire and especially by their immunity to mines. They also performed well in the most extreme environments. Impressive though these machines were, the US Navy was yet to unleash the ultimate amphibious machine.
All right, let's go. Roger.
This is the state-of-the-art hovercraft, known as the LCAC, or Landing Craft Air Cushion.
I think that the British have taken the hovercraft to one level and we've taken it from there and just moved on with it.
LCACs weigh 100 tons and are powered by 4 gas turbine engines developing a whopping 16,000 horsepower.
This is the lift fan module. You have 2 lift fans on either side of the boat. They generate all the air that gives you lift and some propulsion. Right here you have the gearbox and the hydraulic system. The engines sit perpendicular to the drivetrain. The filtration is a lot like a helicopter. Marine gas turbines don't like dirty fuel and they don't like dirty air, so the filtration system is designed to take out everything under the sun. The prop is carbon fiber. It's 18 foot in diameter and it's shrouded by aluminum skin that you can see. Behind the prop is a set of 2 rudders. Those are what's used to steer the after end of the boat along with variable pitch propeller. The technology is phenomenal. From the old days of the old conventional landing craft to what we have now is apples and oranges.
The LCAC ferries Marines and their equipment between ship and shore. They can carry up to 75 tons of equipment over 200 miles. The Americans even have a hovercraft motto: no beach, out of reach. Learning to fly a hovercraft requires high-tech training techniques. The LCAC costs as much as a jet fighter, so any mistakes must be made here and not on the real thing.
That way, I forward. Hold on there. Hold on. We crashed.
After 18 weeks training, recruits have to fly the machines for real and in almost any weather conditions. There's no room for error. Landing the LCAC on a ship demands serious skill and nerves of steel. The Navy have commissioned 91 LCACs divided into 2 assault squadrons. Each costs over $23 million. The US Navy has earmarked $3 billion to this technology.
If you can envision a jet airplane flying over, you see the airplane and then you hear the noise. That's the same way with our hovercraft. They're very loud, but you don't hear the noise until they're on top of you.
The squadron have named themselves the Swift Intruders. LCACs have seen action in the Gulf War and in Somalia, where they withdrew the UN troops. They've also delivered aid in Bangladesh. But the real challenge for the hovercraft is to find a role in peacetime. In 1962, the first ever experimental passenger hovercraft went into service, ferrying people from the seaside town of Wallasey in England across to Wales.
The good thing about hovercraft in the ferry role is that there really is nothing as fast as a hovercraft. And so where there's an area where you want speed and where people have to get around quickly, hovercraft come into their own.
Travelling at over 70 miles an hour, the 40-mile crossing took just 25 minutes.
Things like turnaround times become a big difference with hovercraft. They can just fly up the beach, there's no docking involved, and the hovercraft straight up, unloads, and it's off again.
The experiment was a success. 3 years later, the first scheduled commercial service began, running from the British mainland to the Isle of Wight. Commuters loved it.
Nothing special about my job. I go to the office every day like lots of other people. Only down here, we commute by hovercraft. just like getting on a bus. We could go by boat, of course, but hover travel is, well, quicker.
In fact, the 4-mile crossing took less than 10 minutes. The service is now the oldest in the world. In the last 35 years, it's carried a staggering 15 million passengers to and from the Isle of Wight. Today, they use a modern craft with a more economical and much quieter diesel engine. But there's nothing quiet about this monster. This is the huge SRN-4, the largest civilian hovercraft in the world. It carried 384 passengers and over 50 vehicles across the English Channel.
Wesley 21, thank you very much.
It's 91 feet wide and 185 feet long, and weighs over 300 tons. Its enormous engines drive huge propellers, 21 feet in diameter. Underneath, there are 20 tons of skirt, costing £5 million. At 16 feet, it also has the deepest hovercraft cushion in the world. Since the service began over 30 years ago, these jumbo hovercraft have transported 70 million people and 10 million cars.
David, please.
The controls are more like a plane than a boat, but they have a logic all their own.
The controls are quite simple. In order to move the craft bodily to the left or to the right, I would move the hand wheel to the left or to the right. To turn the craft about a vertical axis, in other words, turning the craft on the pad or at sea by moving the rudder bar with my feet to the left or to the right to initiate a left or right turn. I can, however, additionally turn the craft by use of differential pitch on the pitch levers here.
And cruise, please.
It's very challenging because no 2 days are the same, but I have to say that I've been doing this for 20 years and I feel more happy going at 60 knots than I do at 16 knots. To me, there is safety in speed. You can outmaneuver any other traffic in the channel. The analogy is you being stuck in a traffic jam or a tailback of some sort and you're on a motorbike and you just weave in and out of the stationary traffic.
Avoiding other traffic takes serious skill. The English Channel is the busiest sea lane in the world.
It's 23 nautical miles. It's faster than the tunnel. Just under 35 minutes is our average crossing time.
The SRN-4 holds the record as the world's fastest ferry. In service, it cruises at 70 miles an hour, but in trials with no passengers, this monster has hit over 80. The SRN-4 could operate in most weather conditions, but in 1985, in heavy sea, it smashed into the harbour wall.
The Hovercraft crash. Police now think 4 people died.
The damage to the Princess Margaret is extensive. A 40-foot hole in her starboard side, and the passengers who were sitting here were simply hurled into the sea. A company spokesman said if she'd been a ship and not a hovercraft, she would have sunk, with 370 passengers on board.
In 1972, the smaller Isle of Wight hovercraft overturned in a force-8 gale. The passengers survived the accident, but 5 died when firemen cut a hole in the upturned vessel. Seawater flooded in and drowned them.
250 million people have travelled on a hovercraft, and over 60-70 million cars have been moved, and there's only really been 2 major accidents in all that time. So hovercraft statistically are the safest form of transport in the world.
Safest and also the most versatile. Today, this amazing machine is in use in some of the most remote locations on the planet.
When hovercraft were first mooted, they were seen to be a ferry of the future, but the reality is very few hovercraft are running as ferries. The best place for hovercraft is miles away from people working in remote locations. So hovercraft have been working away very quietly, tucked away, and I think it's been a very well kept secret.
Hovercraft are in active service all around the world. This hover freighter carries gold ore from mines in northern Canada. This is the world's first purpose-built hover ambulance, in service in Queensland, Australia. And this one is specially designed for airport rescue in New Zealand. Off both the east and west coast of Canada, the Coast Guard use hovercraft in place of traditional lifeboats.
Hovercraft gives you speed, plus the amphibious capability allows you to go straight to where the action is.
They use them for search and rescue, surveillance and pollution control. They run missions up to 10 times a day. They're always on standby.
The machines are left hot. They sit with full power on from ground power, and then we just start and leave. And the base is designed in such a way that the machine will be up to almost full speed using the slope of the ramp when it hits the water.
Hovercraft are especially useful when the sea freezes over. Without them, Coast Guards couldn't operate at all.
Hovercraft break the traditional rule of length to breadth ratio. You can't have a barge-shaped high-speed vehicle. You couldn't in the past. That's why a destroyer's long and thin or a fishboat's short and wide. Hovercraft break that rule by lifting out of the water. Thus you can have a high-speed barge or work platform.
On ice, hovercraft are in their element, simply gliding over the surface. But on the east coast of Canada, hovercraft are used to actually break up the ice.
There was a large platform called Act 100 up in the Canadian Arctic, and it was being moved and broke up an ice road, much to the chagrin of the locals. That wasn't supposed to have happened. We've turned that so-called disadvantage into an advantage, and we're now breaking up to 4 feet of ice using a hovercraft.
Operating at temperatures as low as -40, they work quickly and efficiently. They can break up 3 square miles of ice every hour. A conventional ice-breaking boat would be no competition at all. As the hovercraft passes over the ice, it sets up a wave action. As the ice bends, it cracks. Amazingly, the ice fractures without the craft actually touching it. Dispersing the ice now prevents dangerous flooding in the spring. The huge slabs simply float downstream. Pirouetting on the ice, they can clear a whole river in a day. But not all rivers are this easy to negotiate. Hovercraft have proved their true worth operating as expedition vehicles on trips to the very ends of the Earth. In 1968, this expedition navigated the Amazon. These violent rapids were the final leg of a 4,000-mile journey. The Hovercraft may have conquered these rapids, but the worst was yet to come.
It's not what the hovercraft is, which is spectacular. It's where the hovercraft can go. It can go to places where people just cannot reach.
Over the last 23 years, Mike Cole has completed 5 expeditions, taking his hovercraft all over the world. He was the first man to explore the upper reaches of the Amazon in Peru, working against the current. Once there, he set up a hovering medical service.
It's a communication link to link the isolated, you could call them the disenfranchised people, the people who never get aid, to link them into the sources of help.
But his latest journey was the most extraordinary. Mike and his crew set out to cross Central America in their new, sturdy Griffin hovercraft. They were the first ever to make the 400-mile journey from the Mosquito Coast of Nicaragua to the capital, Managua.
By using a river which is unnavigable by boat, in fact, you're preventing the alternative, which is carving a muddy track through the jungle. So they are environmentally positive in every respect. Do you know, when you're going over the water, the fish underneath don't even know you've gone by. And they produce virtually no weight whatsoever. We hit about 4.5 miles of leathery lechuga en route to Managua City, and the hovercraft showed its unique capability. We got over the top and went on towards the city.
When they ran out of river, they simply headed overland towards the Pan American Highway.
We did have a problem because the Pan American Highway, being a first-class road, was cambered. And of course, the hovercraft follows the camber of the road. So we did just have to tether it for a little way and give it a helping hand.
And even a hovercraft needs a little drink once in a while.
All across the developing world, there are situations where this unique British invention can make all the difference to the standard of living of very isolated people. But the countries who need to buy them do not have the hard currency to do.
Over the past 40 years, the hovercraft's astonishing capabilities have made it invaluable in many roles. But with their massive amphibious landing craft, the LCAC, it's the US Navy who have a strategic vision for the hovercraft's future. Sadly though, for Britain's cross-channel ferry, time has run out. Despite their speed, the 2 aging giants have now been retired, and if you've a spare £2 million, you can buy one. To mark their long and inspirational reign, the huge craft celebrated 30 years of service by carrying its most dedicated supporters to a sandbank in the middle of the English Channel. Some of them even brought their own hovercraft. Despite the end of this cross-channel service, passionate believers still say these bizarre machines have a further future. They reckon the golden age of the hovercraft is yet to come.
Next Sunday at 8, we're pulling a fast one with ultimate land speed records. A preview in just a moment. But next tonight, a new kid on the block soon discovers there's something very sinister about the way that unruly teenagers are being transformed into upstanding citizens. Disturbing Behaviour is tonight's scary film premiere, and it follows an update here on 5.